Millions of people spend their lives grinding in highly publicized arenas, tech, finance, AI, competing for an ever-shrinking piece of the pie. But while the masses fight in the open, the largest fortunes are quietly being built in places no one talks about. For over a century, the blueprint for extreme wealth was straightforward. You built an expensive factory, manufactured a superior physical product at scale, and crushed your rivals. Today, almost anyone can find a manufacturer. The physical product itself has become a commodity, a piece of bait used to capture attention. The true mechanism of modern wealth generation is the economic choke point. It is a carefully architected system that sits between a user and something they desperately need, forcing them to pay a toll to pass through. The ultimate goal of these systems isn't to outcompete rivals by offering a slightly better deal. It is to construct an environment where the concept of competition simply doesn't exist. The most visible of these traps operates entirely inside the human mind. The psychological choke point generates immense cash flow by exploiting our deep-seated need for status, belonging, and identity. Most standard businesses try to maximize their output to meet demand. Luxury brands deliberately restrict theirs. They institute multi-year wait lists for specific items, turning the act of buying into a test of worthiness rather than a simple financial transaction. By carefully rationing access, these companies manufacture artificial scarcity. That scarcity breeds an intense feeling of exclusivity, granting the brand the absolute power to dictate exorbitant prices for materials that cost a fraction to produce. This psychological control scales downward to mass consumer goods too. Some of the world's most valuable apparel companies own surprisingly few factories. They realized long ago that the actual value lies in owning the relationship, the trust, and the recognition of the consumer. The modern media industry relies on the exact same architecture. The content is merely the tool used to acquire attention at scale. Once a creator or network holds that attention, they possess a privately owned distribution channel to repeatedly launch new products and services. Owning a massive, loyal audience that buys on command generates far higher margins and recurring revenue than maintaining a complex physical supply chain. While consumer markets rely on psychology, the corporate world relies on pure systemic gravity. This is the entanglement choke point, where wealth is built by becoming the foundational infrastructure of someone else's business. In technology and software, we see winner-take-most economics. Once an operating system, a design suite, or an accounting platform becomes the default standard for an industry, millions of professionals build their entire workflows around it. The exact same dynamic applies to heavy industry and manufacturing. Massive suppliers of industrial machinery embed their highly specific equipment directly into the core operations of countless global supply chains. Switching to a cheaper competitor forces a factory into weeks of total production downtime. The transition demands a complete overhaul of operational procedures, months of worker retraining, and a new, expensive gauntlet of safety certifications. These suppliers spend decades quietly integrating their technology into their clients' facilities. Eventually, they become so deeply woven into the daily workflow that extracting them threatens the survival of the entire operation. At that level of integration, price comparisons become irrelevant. The client is buying reliability and operational continuity. Replacing the supplier carries such catastrophic risk that staying put is the only logical financial decision. The third structural advantage is the asymmetric choke point. Here, the strategy relies on a radical financial disconnect, entirely separating the individual receiving the service from the entity actually paying the bill. Take the multi-trillion-dollar healthcare industry. When a patient receives treatment, an insurance company, an employer, or a government program usually pays the majority of the balance. Because someone else covers the cost, the patient rarely shops around or compares prices, effectively eliminating standard market competition. Real estate uses a different type of asymmetry, leverage. An investor uses a small fraction of their own cash and borrows the rest from a bank to control a massive asset. Then a third party, the tenant, pays rent every month, systematically wiping out the debt. As inflation naturally drives up rent and property values, the investor doesn't sell, they refinance, borrowing against the new, higher value of the building to extract tax-free capital, which they immediately use to acquire the next property. Sitting directly above all of this is the finance sector. Every new apartment complex, software startup, or heavy industrial facility requires massive capital before growth can begin. Financiers evaluate the entire economic board, shifting money toward the most lucrative opportunities. The individuals controlling these massive pools of capital participate in the upside of hundreds of separate ventures simultaneously. They construct vast wealth not by exhausting their own resources, but by placing a toll booth on the ambition of everyone else. But to find the most consistent, invisible millionaire-making engines, you have to look away from the future entirely and focus on the aggressively unglamorous businesses maintaining the present. Right now, thousands of startups are racing to build next-generation artificial intelligence, but every single chatbot prompt and cloud server creates a massive physical demand for electricity. The people owning the grid, the power lines, and the utility infrastructure secure decades of guaranteed cash flow from that exact, unavoidable demand. Zoom down to the local level, and you find the exact same dynamic in millions of homes. Property ownership requires endless, unavoidable maintenance: plumbing, HVAC repair, pest control, and waste management. When an air conditioning unit dies in the middle of a brutal July heat wave, or a water pipe bursts in a basement, the homeowner does not spend 3 weeks researching the most cost-effective alternative. It is an immediate crisis that demands instant financial surrender. Knowing this, private equity firms are currently executing a quiet, multi-billion-dollar campaign across the country. They are buying up thousands of these fragmented, boring local service operators and consolidating them into massive corporate networks. While millions of ambitious people burn themselves out trying to invent the next big thing, the truly wealthy understand a simpler equation. The safest way to secure a fortune is to own a monopoly on the unavoidable emergencies of everyday life.